The chestnut stallion stumbled into Tahu's path just as the sun sank behind the rim of the canyon, painting the world in copper light and long black shadows. At first, the warrior thought the animal was a mirage, some trick of heat rising from the hardpan earth. But then he heard it, the sharp, uneven rhythm of hooves dragging through the dust, followed by a sound more chilling, a broken, ragged whinny, half-gasp, half-dash cry. The horse moved like a creature caught between life and death. Its once proud coat was dulled with sweat and streaked with dirt, ribs heaving beneath the skin. The reins dangled uselessly from its bridle, torn as though wrenched free in violence. The saddle sat askew, the leather straps frayed, as if clawed apart in a desperate struggle. But it wasn't these signs of hardship that made Tahu pause in the fading light. It was the smell. Blood. He knew that coppery tang well. The stallion was marked with it, though the cuts on its flanks were shallow. No, this wasn't the horse's. Blood? Somewhere out there, a rider had fallen. Tahu pressed a steady hand to the animal's neck, feeling the frantic tremor of its pulse. The beast's eyes rolled white, the whites shining in fear. Horses didn't wander like this on their own. A horse stayed with its herd. A saddle stayed with its rider. For one to come lurching through the wilderness alone, it meant only one thing. It had fled something. Something that had teeth or claws, or worse, the hand of a man. The warrior studied the horizon. The prairie stretched out flat and endless, painted in the last light of day. Sagebrush clung stubbornly to the earth, and far off, a line of cottonwoods shivered near a dry creek bed. The silence pressed against him, heavy and watchful. Not even a bird cried. The world had folded in on itself, waiting. Tahu was not a man of many words, even to himself, but he thought of omens. In his people's ways, a wounded animal could be a messenger, a spirit sent to lead the living toward truth or danger. Perhaps both. He let his palm linger on the horse's neck, murmuring softly in his own tongue. The beast quivered but stilled, as though it recognized something steady in the man's presence. Dust swirled around them in the cooling air, carrying with it the faint smell of gunpowder. That too made Tahu's chest tighten. He had smelled it before, after ambushes, after campfires burned down to ash and bone. His eyes drifted to the torn leather at the saddle's edge. He traced it with his fingers, noting the jagged edge of the cut. Not wear, not weather. A knife. Someone had tried to cut themselves free in a hurry. His jaw clenched. Whoever had ridden this horse had been desperate, and they had not succeeded. Sun dipped lower, the horizon bleeding into purple. The warrior could have turned away then, left the horse to wander back into the wilderness and whatever shadows chased it. But something in the animal's gaze rooted him to the earth. Its eyes were not empty. They were pleading. Tahu rose slowly to his feet, scanning the trail behind the horse. Its tracks were erratic, weaving through sagebrush and stone. Not the meandering path of a grazing animal, but the frantic line of one trying to outrun pursuit. He stooped low, fingertips brushing the dirt. Fresh, less than an hour old. He felt the ground's faint warmth still holding the impression of hooves. The stallion snorted, pawing nervously, then jerked its head toward the horizon where the tracks led. It was almost as if the beast was urging him onward, unwilling to return but unwilling to stand alone. Tahu adjusted the strap of his hatchet against his hip and rose fully, broad shoulders silhouetted against the dying light. He did not hurry. The prairie was a place that punished haste. Instead, he set his stride steady, following the line of hoof prints etched in dust and stone. The wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of damp earth, a faint trace of smoke, and something else faint, like a whisper nearly drowned out by silence. A groan of wood? A hinge moving in the distance? He could not be sure. The horse followed a few paces behind him. limping but determined, as though it would not let the warrior bear the burden alone. And so they walked together into the falling night, two figures drawn toward an unseen end. Tahu's eyes remained fixed on the trail, every sense sharpened, every muscle coiled. Whatever waited beyond the horizon, it had already left its mark in blood, and the warrior knew whether it was death or fate or both. It was waiting for him too. The trail wound through miles of prairie grass before breaking into the hushed remains of a forgotten town. Tahu slowed his steps, the stallion trailing close behind, head low and sides trembling. The town had the look of a place left behind. In haste, where doors still hung open and windows gaped like toothless mouths. Faded signs clung to the fronts of crooked buildings, black letters almost unreadable in the moonlight. Once, this place had known music, voices, and the clatter of boots on wooden porches. Now, the only sound was the restless whimper of the wind dragging dust through empty streets. A broken church bell hung askew in its tower, swaying faintly though no wind touched it. The clapboard walls of the saloon leaned sideways, paint peeled. Bare, its swinging doors hanging loose by a single hinge. Coyotes lingered in the alleys, their eyes catching the moon, but they did not approach. Even they seemed wary of the silence, as though some memory of violence still lingered in the wood and stone. Tahu walked slowly, every step measured. His moccasins stirred little dust, and his sharp gaze moved across the ruins as if expecting movement in each shadow. His people had stories about places like this, towns that died too fast. Sometimes it was hunger or drought. Other times it was man. He could feel the difference. This one had been swallowed in violence. The stallion tugged its head suddenly toward the edge of town. Tahu followed its line of sight. At the farthest edge stood a barn, the structure hunched and leaning like an old man. Part of the roof had collapsed inward, and one side sagged dangerously, but it still held together, a stubborn relic against time. The horse stamped nervously, ears pinned back. It didn't want to go nearer, yet some invisible tether pulled it that way. Tahu laid a hand against the animal's neck, whispering reassurance in the tongue of his people. Then he strode forward, the earth crunching faintly beneath his weight. When he reached the barn doors, he paused. The wood was gray with age, scarred with knife cuts, bullet holes, and stains darkened over time. He pressed one broad hand against the panel, and the hinges groaned when he pushed. The door swung open with a long, complaining shriek that echoed. In the hollow town, inside dust drifted like pale smoke. The smell was thick stale hay, old wood, and beneath it something heavier, the sharp tang of blood. His eyes adjusted to the gloom, and slowly the barn's secrets came into shape. Straw lay scattered across the dirt floor, and in it, crumpled like a discarded rag, was a young woman. Her dress was torn, fabric once white now soaked in crimson. Along her side, her hair, tangled with hay, spread across the ground in a halo gone wild. One arm lay crooked beneath her, and the other clutched weakly at her ribs as though even in unconsciousness she was trying to hold herself together. Tahu's breath caught, though no sound left his throat. He moved toward her, each step careful, as though afraid the very weight of his body would shatter her. He crouched at her side and studied the wound. It wasn't clean. Whatever had torn her had done so roughly, and she had bled long. Her lips were pale, cracked, and her breathing came shallow, quick, like a trapped bird. For a moment, he simply watched her, the silence heavy between them. Then her eyelids fluttered. Green eyes blinked open, dazed and clouded, but aware enough to find him. Her gaze widened, fear flashing through it. Her lips parted, dry and trembling, but no voice came, only a soft rasp. She tried again, breath scraping like broken glass. "Don't let them find me." Her head fell back against the straw, eyes squeezing shut in pain. Tahu reached to his side and tore a strip from his deerskin shirt. With hands steady as stone, he pressed the fabric firmly against her wound. She gasped and twisted, a weak sound escaping her throat, but his other hand held her shoulder, firm and grounding. He spoke low in his language, words she could not understand but that carried the calm weight of mountains. "Stay. Breathe. The trail has brought me here." Her trembling fingers caught his wrist suddenly, surprising him with their strength. She blinked her eyes open again, desperation burning through the haze. "They'll come back," she whispered, her voice barely louder than the rustle of hay. Her nails pressed faint crescents into his skin. "Please, don't let them take me back." The warrior did not answer. Not yet. His gaze swept the dark corners of the barn, listening. He heard only the faint squeak of wood settling, the slow shift of the horse just outside, and her fragile breath. But he knew she was right. This was not over. Whoever had left her here had not finished their work, and now, he thought grimly, they would return to find her no longer alone. The barn was heavy with silence, broken only by the slow, shallow rasp of Clara's breathing and the faint creak of wood overhead. Tahu crouched beside her, his strong frame outlined by moonlight seeping through the cracked roof. The woman's blood had soaked through the strip of cloth he pressed against her side, yet she clung to consciousness with a stubbornness that stirred something deep in him. Her lips moved again, forming words so faint he leaned closer just to catch them. "Don't let them find me." Tahu's dark eyes flicked to hers, and for the first time he saw the fear beneath her strength. Not the kind of fear that came from pain, but the kind that grew from knowing monsters wore men's faces. He did not answer her in English. Seldom wasted words in that tongue, but his gaze, steady and unflinching, told her she had been heard. He shifted, reaching into the pouch at his belt. From it, he drew a bundle wrapped in deerskin, herbs dried by the sun and carried for times such as this. With calloused fingers, he crushed them into a powder and sprinkled it across the wound before tying the strip of cloth tighter. Clara gasped. Sharply, her hand shooting up to clutch at his wrist again. Her grip was trembling but fierce. "You'll kill me," she whispered, though her eyes held a spark that dared him to deny it. Tahu shook his head slowly, his long black hair brushing against his shoulders. His voice came low, deep and steady, a rumble like distant thunder. "Not kill. Heal." The words seemed to reach her, and though her breathing remained shallow, she eased back into the straw, releasing his arm. Her green eyes fluttered closed, but she did not let herself drift away fully. She seemed to fear what dreams might bring. Tahu dipped a cloth into his waterskin and brushed it gently across her cracked lips. She sighed faintly, the water reviving her for another fragile moment. When she opened her eyes again, they held his with something between gratitude and disbelief. "Why?" "Help me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The warrior did not answer at once. He sat back on his heels, studying her. He had been raised among silence, where words were used sparingly, and deeds spoke for men. To him, the answer was simple life left untended was an insult to the Creator. Yet he could see in her eyes that she wanted more than silence. She wanted to know why he had stopped when others might have passed by. "Finally," he said, "horse led me." Her lips curved into something that might have been a faint, broken laugh, though it ended in a grimace of pain. "Then I owe that horse more than I'll ever owe a man." Tahu's gaze shifted briefly toward the barn doors. The stallion waited just outside, its silhouette steady against the night. The animal seemed calmer now, as though its burden had been shared. Clara's eyes followed his glance, then snapped back to him with sudden urgency. She struggled to lift herself, wincing as fire lanced through her wound. "They'll come back. You don't know them. They don't leave things unfinished." Her voice trembled, edged with desperation. Tahu pressed a broad hand gently but firmly against her shoulder, easing her back down. "Rest," he said simply, but she shook her head weakly, strands of hair clinging to her damp forehead. "You don't understand. If they see you here, they'll kill you too." The warrior's jaw tightened. In truth, he did understand. He had known men like that, cowards who hunted the weak, who fed off fear. They had taken his brother years ago, left him to die with the blackthorn symbol carved into the dirt beside his body. The memory stirred hot in Tahu's chest. Though outwardly he remained as unmoving as stone, he bent closer, his voice a whisper meant only for her. "They will not find you." Clara's breathing hitched, a single tear slipping from the corner of her eye, tracing a pale path through the dirt on her cheek. She did not argue again. Her hand, trembling, found its way to rest lightly on his arm as if clinging to that promise. Outside, the night deepened. Coyotes yipped in the distance, their voices carrying through the empty town, sharp and hungry. The stallion stamped once, then went still. Tahu sat with his back against the stall wall, the hatchet resting across his lap, and let the silence wrap around them like a shroud. He could feel it, the weight of danger pressing close, like the charged air before a storm. The woman's warning was not born of fear alone. Whoever hunted her was still out there, and the trail was not yet cold. He glanced down at Clara again. Her eyes had finally closed, her breathing evening out just enough to suggest sleep. Yet even in sleep, her fingers still curled faintly into the fabric of his arm, unwilling to let go. The warrior stared into the shadows, muscles taut beneath his scarred skin, listening. The barn creaked, the prairie sighed, and somewhere carried, faintly on the wind, came the echo of men's laughter. They were not far, and soon the darkness would bring them. The barn smelled of straw and iron. Every breath Clara drew was shallow, strained, as if each one might be her last. Tahu stayed near her side, silent and unmoving except for the steady pressure of his hand on the cloth binding her wound. Outside, the night stretched wide and hollow, but inside the barn it felt close, heavy with the weight of secrets not yet spoken. When she stirred again, her eyes fluttering open against the dim light, he saw a flash of something fierce beneath. The weakness. Her pale fingers trembled as they sought the dirt floor beside her. Slowly, shakily, she dragged a line into the dust with the tip of her finger. Her breathing hitched, but she did not stop. Tahu leaned closer, watching as her hand drew not words but a crude symbol. A circle, broken on one side, with a thorn jagging out like a wound. His chest tightened. Clara's voice cracked as she forced it out. "They wear it, on their coats, on their guns." She swallowed hard, her eyes glassy but intent. "They call themselves the Blackthorn Gang." The name was already etched into his memory. He had heard it whispered in border towns, painted in fear across the faces of settlers and ranchers alike. Yet he did not need her explanation. The sight of that symbol alone had been enough. For a moment, the barn seemed to tilt, the air pressing heavier around him. He saw, in his mind, another night years ago, another trail of dust, another rider left broken on the ground. His brother Kanos, with eyes still bright in the firelight until the gunfire cut him down. The blackthorn mark had been carved into the dirt beside his body. As though those men had wanted the earth itself to carry their name, Tahu's jaw hardened. He had buried Kanos with his own hands, pressing the soil down until his palms bled. He had sworn never to chase vengeance, for vengeance only chained a man to death. But now here, the trail had led him back to that name. And the Creator, or fate or something darker, had placed this woman in his path. Clara's hand slipped weakly from the dirt, falling back to her side. Her eyes searched his face, perhaps trying to read what she had awoken in him. You know them, she whispered. It wasn't a question. Tahu nodded once, a slow, solemn gesture. Her throat worked as she swallowed. Then you know. They won't stop. If they find me alive, they'll finish it. And if they see you with me. She trailed off, her breath shuddering. They will try, he finished for her, his voice low, steady, like stone grinding against stone. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the restless shifting of the horse outside and the faint groan of the barn's timbers. Then Clara blinked, and to his surprise, a single tear traced a path down her dirt-streaked cheek. She turned her face away, ashamed of it, though her body shook from exhaustion and pain. Tahu reached out, not with words but with action, lifting the fallen strip of cloth from her wound and replacing it with another, tighter binding. His movements were careful, deliberate, each one carrying a quiet promise. He would not abandon her. Her eyes met his again, wide and green even in the dimness. Why? She breathed. Why help me when you know what it means? Tahu looked at her for a long moment, then past her to the symbol she had drawn in the dirt. The circle broken, the thorn jagged. He thought of his brother, of the oath he had carried silently all these years, not to seek death, but to honor life where it still clung. Finally, he spoke. Because they take too much. His gaze held hers, unblinking. Not tonight. Something softened in her face then, as though the edge of her fear had dulled. She let her eyes close once more, the weight of exhaustion dragging her under, but not before her lips parted to whisper, "Thank you." Tahu sat back, his hatchet resting. Across his lap, his long black hair catching the faint light of the moon through the rafters. The barn was still, but it no longer felt empty. It felt like a threshold between past and present, between loss and what must come next. Outside, the coyotes had gone silent. The air shifted, carrying with it the faint murmur of voices on the faisa. Windmen's voices. Laughing, careless, drawing closer. Tahu's eyes hardened, every muscle in his body taut. The Blackthorn gang was near, and this time the trail did not belong only to them. The night pressed in heavy around the barn, the kind of silence that made every creak of wood and shift of straw sound like a warning. The lantern's flame sputtered, throwing restless shadows against the splintered boards. The woman stirred faintly in the hay, her breath uneven, and the warrior leaned closer, his hand steady against the cloth binding her wound. He had done what he could with the little at hand, but the blood had not fully stopped. Her eyes opened. Again, cloudy but determined. "They'll come," she whispered, her voice so weak it was nearly lost beneath the moan of the wind. "They won't stop until I'm gone." The warrior's jaw tightened. He had not asked who she meant. He did not need to. Men who hunted women down did not stop for reason or mercy. He shifted, his long black hair brushing her cheek as he adjusted the cloth at her side. His turquoise necklace caught the faint lantern glow, shining like a shard of fire in the darkness. "You are safe," he said, his voice low but firm. "While I am here." Her lips trembled, caught between belief and fear. She searched his face as if weighing whether his words were more than a promise spoken into the night. Finally, her lashes lowered and she murmured, "Why would you risk it? You don't even know me." The warrior did not answer right away. His gaze flicked toward the doorway where the horse stood restless, ears twitching at every sound. Danger was close. He could feel it in the cold stillness outside. But he looked back at her, meeting her pale green eyes. "Because no one deserves to be hunted like an animal," he said simply. For a moment, silence returned, broken only by the distant howl of a coyote. The woman's throat tightened, her tears shimmering in the moonlight. She turned her head away as if ashamed of the fear that had rooted inside her. "I didn't run fast enough," she whispered. "I thought I could escape through the creek." bed, but the horse? Her voice broke. The warrior followed her gaze to the chestnut horse standing guard. The animal bore scratches and a limp, but it had carried her farther than any would have expected. Loyalty shone in the beast's dark eyes, a loyalty that matched the way it had led him straight here. He respected the horse's spirit. It had brought her to him. He reached for his pouch, pulling out a small leather flask. Tilting it carefully, he poured cool water over a clean strip of cloth, then touched it gently to her lips. She drank, trembling but eager, and the relief in her eyes made something inside him shift, an old memory of carrying his sister to water when she had burned with fever as a child. "You are strong," he told her, watching the way she struggled to keep her eyes open. "Stronger than you think." A bitter smile ghosted across her lips. "Strong doesn't matter when men with rifles are hunting you down." His eyes darkened, reflecting a steel resolve that no rifle could shake. He adjusted the cloth binding and said, "Then we will make sure they do not find you here." The barn groaned in the wind. A loose shutter banged against the side, startling. The horse outside. The warrior rose silently, moving toward the door. His powerful frame filled the entrance, silhouetted against the moonlight. His tribal jewelry glinted like silent warnings in the night. He scanned the open land, the endless stretch of prairie dotted with shadows and silver grass. Nothing moved, but he could feel them out there. Men with cruel eyes, moving like wolves in the dark. When he returned to her side, she was watching him, a mixture of fear and fragile hope flickering across her face. "If they come," she began, but he silenced her with a firm look. "They will come," he admitted. "But when they do, they will not find you alone." Her breath hitched. For the first time since she had collapsed in the barn, she felt the faintest spark of safety. Not because the danger was gone, but because she no longer faced it by herself. The warrior's presence was a shield, silent but unyielding. She reached weakly for his hand, her fingers brushing against his scarred skin. He did not pull away. Instead, he let her hold on, her small trembling hand dwarfed by his strong one. Outside, the wind carried a new sound, distant hoofbeats, slow, steady, growing closer. The warrior's eyes hardened. The night was no longer empty. The barn held its breath. Even the wind seemed to hesitate, carrying the faint rustle of prairie grass like a warning. Outside, the chestnut stallion shifted, stamping one hoof and letting out a soft whinny. The faint smell of blood and dust hung heavy in the air. Tahu's dark eyes, sharp and unblinking, scanned the gaps in the walls and roof. Every muscle in his body was coiled, every sense alert. The Blackthorn gang had left tracks that led straight here, and he knew they would follow them, drawn by the scent of desperation and blood. Clara stirred, her eyelids fluttering as she woke to the sound of movement beyond the barn. "They're back," she whispered, her voice trembling. Her hand found his arm, clinging as though it were the only. "Anchor in the night." Tahu nodded once, eyes narrowing. He did not speak. Words were unnecessary here. Silence was their only shield. If he made a sound now, if she panicked, the barn would betray them. He tightened the cloth around her wound, pressed his palm lightly on her shoulder, and motioned for her to stay still. The first crunch of boots on the dry earth outside made him flinch slightly, muscles coiling like springs. Shadows passed across the gaps in the barn walls, long and sharp, carrying the threat of the men outside. They muttered among themselves, careless and cocky. One voice laughed a harsh, brash sound that carried the arrogance of those who believed. No one could challenge them. "They didn't go far," another whispered. "The horse led right here. They can't have gotten far without her." Tahu's hand slid to the hatchet at his belt, thumb brushing the cool leather. His other hand stayed lightly on Clara's shoulder, a promise without words. "Do not move, do not scream." She obeyed, her green eyes wide, filled with fear but also trust. He could hear them now, stopping just outside the barn doors, boots shifting in the dust. The moonlight outlined them, faintly figures cloaked in shadow, rifles resting lazily. In their hands, but ready. Tahu's jaw tightened. The men thought themselves clever, thinking the barn abandoned. They would not know the danger that lurked inside. One of the men moved closer to the door. He muttered, "She can't be far." Just inside, the horse nose. A coyote howl from the distance cut through the night like a knife, sudden and sharp. The sound startled the men, who cursed under their breaths and shuffled back slightly. Tahu held his breath with them, muscles still as stone, eyes fixed on the sliver of moonlight that marked the doorway. Clara's fingers clenched the hay beneath her knuckles white. Tahu glanced at her once, his gaze reassuring but silent. They would not find her here. Not while he was watching. Minutes stretched, each one feeling like an eternity. The men muttered, argued, and finally, one cursed loudly. "Ain't worth it," he said. "The wind's off. Let's move before someone else comes along. She's gone or dead." The sounds of their boots retreated into the night, crunching. Over stone and dry grass, fading gradually until only the soft whinny of the horse remained outside. The barn exhaled in relief, dust drifting lazily down from the beams above. Tahu's hand slid from Clara's shoulder, but he stayed close, eyes scanning the dark outside. She exhaled shakily, tears streaking the dust from her cheeks. "You saved me," she whispered, voice trembling with disbelief and relief. I didn't think anyone would come." Tahu's eyes softened slightly, though he did not smile. "You were never alone," he said. "Not tonight." Outside, the night seemed wider somehow, quieter, as if the prairie itself recognized the pause between danger and safety. The stallion nuzzled Clara gently, sensing her stillness, and the warrior's eyes followed the outline of the animal. Thinking of all the trails that had led him here, he knew the Blackthorn gang would not give up. They were patient, cruel, but they would have to find another way, because this barn, this night, and this man would not give her over. Clara shifted slightly, leaning against the warrior, exhaustion overwhelming her, yet a flicker of trust held her steady. Tahu's gaze stayed on the doorway, alert and unyielding, as the first hint of dawn began to pale the horizon. Somewhere out there, the night still held shadows. But inside, for a brief, fragile moment, they were safe. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the prairie in shades of amber and gold. Dust motes danced in the fragile beams that pierced the barn's broken roof. Tahu sat on the straw, back straight, eyes scanning the slowly brightening landscape. The night had been long, the shadows heavy, and the threat of the Blackthorn gang still lingered like smoke in the wind. But for the moment, the barn was theirs. Clara stirred beside him, her green eyes blinking against the soft morning light. Her fingers reached out instinctively, finding his arm and holding on, seeking reassurance. "Are they gone?" she asked, voice hoarse but steadier than before. Tahu nodded, long black hair falling across his shoulders. His muscular frame, bronzed and scarred from countless trails and battles, seemed larger in the early light. Tribal jewelry of turquoise, bone, and silver shimmered faintly, catching the sun's first rays. "For now," he said, "but we cannot stay." Her gaze followed his, lingering on the barn door. The prairie outside stretched endlessly, pale gold under the rising sun. For a moment, fear flickered across her face again, but it was tempered by the presence of the man who had become her shield. "We can ride," Tahu said, rising smoothly. He offered his hand to help her sit upright. Her wounded side protested, but she leaned into him, trusting his strength. The warrior's eyes softened for the briefest instant as he adjusted the cloth around her ribs. Hold steady, he instructed. Chestnut Stallion waited obediently outside, nostrils flaring, muscles tensing and relaxing as it sensed the promise of movement. Tahu reached out, running his hand along the horse's neck, whispering softly in the language of his people. The animal nickered in response, as though understanding the urgency. Clara mounted with his help, leaning heavily against him. The warrior swung up behind her, his long hair whipping lightly in the morning breeze, eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of pursuit. Every sense was alert, every nerve tuned to the faintest sound. The prairie seemed quiet, but Tahu knew. Better. Men like the Blackthorn gang never forgot. The horse shifted, stamping once, then moved forward at a slow, steady pace. The barn receded behind them, a dark silhouette against the rising sun, a memory of fear now left behind. Clara clutched the reins weakly, but Tahu's hand rested over hers, guiding, supporting, protecting. They rode in silence for miles, the wind carrying the smell of sagebrush and dry grass, the sun warming their backs. Clara's breathing grew. Steadier, the pulse of life returning stronger with each beat. Her eyes, once wide with terror, began to soften, filled with awe at the man beside her, the stranger who had risked everything for her survival. "You saved me," she whispered, voice barely above the wind. "I don't even know how to repay you." Tahu's eyes remained fixed ahead, yet he spoke with calm certainty. "You do not repay. You live." Her fingers brushed his, tentative, grateful. For a long moment, the prairie around them was quiet, save for the rhythmic thump of hooves against the hardpan earth. The rising sun gilded the distant hills in gold, chasing shadows from the land. Chasing the darkness from her heart. As they crested a small rise, the barn became just another silhouette. Behind them, dwarfed by the vastness of the world ahead, freedom stretched before them, wide and open, a promise of life beyond fear. The Blackthorn gang might still roam, but their reach had limits. With the warrior beside her, she felt the first real hope she had known in days or perhaps years. Tahu's hand lingered briefly on hers before he released it, adjusting the blanket across her lap. "We will reach safety," he said. "Together." Clara leaned back against him, the horse moving steadily onward, her chest rising and falling with renewed strength. Her eyes caught the first glimmer of a distant creek where water would wash away the night's blood and dirt. She allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. For the first time, she believed it. And as the sun climbed higher, spilling golden light over the endless prairie, Tahu's gaze remained watchful, fierce, and unwavering. He had followed the horse, braved the darkness, faced the threat of men who left death in their wake. But now, for the first time, he rode not for vengeance, not for survival alone, but to carry the fragile, burning life of another through the dawn. And in that vast open land, under the endless sky, they rode together, leaving the shadows behind toward a horizon where hope waited.